Look at your feet, right now. Most of us treat them like basic landing gear, something to shove into shoes and forget. But your feet are actually the most sophisticated diagnostic dashboard in the human body. Forget the standard medical lecture. This is a systems audit. Most people wait for a check engine light like chest pain or a massive headache. But metabolic health doesn't crash all at once. It erodes from the edges inward. Think of your body like a power grid. When the plant fails, the main city stays lit, but the far suburbs go dark first. Today, we're skipping the doctor's office and the week-long wait for blood work. We are tapping directly into your body's early warning system. I've distilled decades of clinical data into a ground-up survival guide to audit your circulation, your nerves, and your foundation. By the time this video ends, you'll read your feet like a medical chart. You'll know exactly where your system is glitching and how to reboot it before the damage becomes permanent. Let's start the audit. It sounds like you want to polish that middle section even further to keep the momentum high. To avoid any potential plagiarism and keep a 50-plus audience hooked, we should lean into pattern recognition, the mirror rule, and immediate action. Here is a tighter, high-impact version. The mirror rule and the glucose sink. Don't assume every foot cramp is a medical disaster. If only your right foot is tingling, you've likely got a pinched nerve or a tight shoe. But if that sensation is a mirror image, affecting both feet identically, that's a high-level alert. It means your system is being sanded down by excess sugar. If you're feeling that internal static, the clock is ticking to repair the wiring. Your fastest fix is the glucose sink. Within 20 minutes of finishing dinner, get moving. You don't need a heavy workout. A simple 15-minute brisk walk transforms your leg muscles into a metabolic sponge. They'll soak up that abrasive sugar before it can scour your nerves while you sleep. But remember, if the wires are sparking, the pipes are usually clogging. We've checked the electrical grid. Now, we have to look at the plumbing. Don't panic if your foot hurts. It's not always diabetes. If only your right foot tingles, it's likely just a pinched nerve or a shoe that's too tight. But if the sensation is a mirror image, happening in both feet at once, that is a massive red flag. Your system is being poisoned by excess sugar. If you're feeling that static, you need to fix the wiring now. The most effective tool in your kit is the glucose sink. Within 20 minutes of your last bite of dinner, move. You don't need the gym. A simple 15-minute brisk walk turns your leg muscles into a metabolic sponge. They soak up that sandpaper sugar before it can scour your nerves while you sleep. Now that we've addressed the electrical grid, we have to look at the plumbing. Because if your wires are sparking, your pipes are almost certainly clogging. We've talked about the static, the pain, and the buzzing, but there is something much more dangerous than pain, the absence of it. In our audit, this is the transition into the silent zone. When the liquid sandpaper has finished its work, the nerve doesn't just glitch, it dies. This is called peripheral neuropathy. You lose what we call your protective sensation. Pain is an evolutionary gift. It's the alarm system that tells you to move your hand off the stove. When that alarm is cut, you are walking through the world in a state of sensory blindness. I once saw a patient who had spent a day walking on a beautiful sun-drenched beach in Mexico. He had a great time. He didn't feel a thing. It wasn't until he got back to his hotel room and took his socks off that he realized the skin on the bottom of both feet had literally cooked. He had second-degree burns, But because he was in the silent zone, his brain never got the memo. Most people miss this because they think they've just developed tough calluses or that they're just getting older and losing feeling. No, if you can't feel a feather-light touch on the bottom of your big toe, your shield is down. When you can't feel pain, a tiny pebble in your shoe isn't an annoyance. It's a weapon. It will grind into your flesh for 10,000 steps, creating a hole that your body can't fix. This leads us directly to the second phase of our audit, the logistics. How does your body actually repair itself when the alarm system is broken? Let's look at the supply chain. Think of your body as a sprawling, high-functioning city. Every city, no matter how grand, relies entirely on its supply chain to survive. If the delivery trucks can't bring in the food and the fuel tankers can't reach the power plants, the city eventually grinds to a halt. In this analogy, your feet are the absolute furthest outposts, the rural neighborhoods at the very end of the line. To keep these outposts alive and healthy, your heart has to act as a massive distribution center, pumping oxygen, white blood cells, and vital nutrients down a long, narrow highway of blood vessels. In a perfectly healthy system, these highways are elastic, wide, and incredibly responsive. They expand and contract to meet the demands of the outpost. But when you are struggling with chronically high blood sugar, the environment changes. The sugar in your blood triggers a constant state of low-grade inflammation. This isn't just a minor irritation. It leads to the buildup of plaque along the inner walls of your arteries. Over time, those wide-open highways become stiff, narrowed, and eventually they turn into calcified pipes. This is the medical reality of peripheral artery disease, or PAD. Your logistics system isn't just slowing down. It's facing a permanent structural gridlock that prevents the delivery trucks from ever reaching their destination. This logistics failure is most visible when you look at how your body handles a minor injury. We call this the stalled delivery. In a healthy person, a small scrape or a blister is a minor event. The moment the skin is broken, the body's repair crew, your white blood cells and growth factors, rushes to the scene to kill bacteria and knit the tissue back together. But if your supply chain has collapsed due to high sugar, that repair crew is effectively stuck in traffic miles away from the wound. If a simple blister from Tuesday is still raw, red, and weeping by Sunday, that is a massive red flag. It means the oxygen required for cellular repair isn't arriving, and the immune cells needed to prevent infection are locked out of the area. When the delivery of these supplies is stalled, the wound doesn't just sit there, it begins to deteriorate. Without a constant supply of fresh building materials, your body cannot close the door to the outside world, leaving you vulnerable to deep-seated infections that can spread before you even realize there's a problem. Now, let's look at this differently by talking about temperature. We've all heard someone say, "I've always just had cold feet. It runs in the family." While genetics play a role in many things, chronic Arctic extremity is often a sign of infrastructure decay rather than family history. If your feet feel like literal blocks of ice, even when you're tucked under a heavy wool blanket or sitting by a fireplace, you need to ask why the heat isn't reaching them. External heat sources like blankets or socks can only do so much because your primary source of warmth is internal. Your blood is your body's internal heating fluid. If the pipes in your legs have become so narrow and calcified that the volume of warm blood reaching your toes is a mere trickle, your feet will remain cold regardless of the environment. The basement of your skyscraper is freezing because the furnace is working, but the vents are blocked. To see how this plays out in real life, imagine you're wearing a new pair of shoes. You go for a walk and you get a tiny standard rub on your heel. To a healthy person with a functioning supply chain, that's a 3-day inconvenience that heals and disappears. But to someone with a logistics failure, that tiny rub is a check engine light for a looming catastrophe. Because the blood flow is so restricted, the skin on the heel doesn't have the resources to repair the friction damage. Instead of healing, the tissue begins to die from the inside out, turning that minor rub into a deep, chronic ulcer. This is how a nothing scratch escalates into a surgical emergency. The lack of oxygen means the tissue is essentially starving to death. And because the nerves might already be glitching from phase 1, you might not even feel the ulcer getting deeper until it's already reached the bone. Before we move on, I have to share a pro tip that most people, and even some healthcare providers, completely miss. It's the socks and constriction trap. When your feet are chronically cold, your natural instinct is to put on the thickest, tightest, most elastic socks you can find to trap the heat. However, if your logistics system is already failing, those tight elastic bands around your ankles act like a tourniquet. By wearing restrictive socks, you are physically squeezing the very vessels that are already struggling to deliver blood. You are essentially choking off the last remaining trickle of your supply chain. If you're going to wear socks for warmth, they must be non-binding or specialized diabetic socks that offer warmth without adding external pressure to an already compromised logistics network. Now, if the blood isn't getting down there to nourish the tissues, something else starts to happen on the surface. We've looked at the pipes, but now we need to look at the paint of the skyscraper. Your skin starts to peel, flake, and eventually it begins to crack. Before we move into phase 3, consider this. The most expensive, high-end lotion in the world won't fix a foot that is drying out from the inside. To understand why your heels are cracking despite your best efforts, we have to talk about the irrigation shutdown. We've spent time auditing the wires and the pipes, but now we need to look at the exterior finish of the skyscraper, the paint and sealant of your body, which is your skin. In a perfectly tuned system, your skin stays supple, flexible, and waterproof because of a highly sophisticated automatic irrigation system. This system is controlled by the autonomic nerves, the quiet background workers of your body that handle everything you don't actively think about, like your heart rate or digestion. These nerves are responsible for signaling your sweat and oil glands to produce the moisture necessary to keep your skin's barrier intact. However, when blood sugar remains high for too long, it doesn't just damage the nerves you use to feel pain. It ruthlessly targets these autonomic nerves as well. When these nerves go dark, the irrigation system simply shuts off. Your feet stop producing the natural oils and moisture they need to stay resilient. You might initially look at this and think, great, no more smelly feet or damp socks. But that lack of moisture is a catastrophic failure. Without that natural lubrication, your skin's bricks and mortar lose their flexibility. Your feet aren't just dry. They are becoming a desert, and a desert is a very fragile place for a foundation to sit. This metabolic drought manifests most clearly as infrastructure decay, specifically in the form of deeply cracked heels. Most people dismiss this as a cosmetic issue or a side effect of walking barefoot, But from a clinical perspective, it is much more serious. When skin becomes brittle and loses its elasticity, it can no longer stretch to accommodate the pressure of your weight as you walk. Instead, it snaps. These snaps create what we call fissures, deep, jagged cracks that can eventually reach down into the living tissue. Think of these fissures as open, unguarded doors. In a healthy body, the skin is an impenetrable fortress. In a state of irrigation shutdown, these cracks act as high-speed highways for bacteria and pathogens to march straight into your bloodstream. Because this is happening in an environment where the logistics, blood flow, are already compromised. An infection starting in one of these cracks can escalate with terrifying speed. Because the drought is so visible, I see people making a critical moisturizing mistake every single day. They see the cracks and they respond by slathering on the thickest, greasiest lotions or petroleum jelly they can find. The mistake isn't the moisturizing itself, it's the application. People tend to apply these heavy creams everywhere, especially in the tight spaces between the toes. You must stop doing this. When you trap moisture between your toes, you aren't hydrating the skin. You are creating a maceration zone. It is the exact equivalent of leaving a Band-Aid on your finger while sitting in a swimming pool for 3 days. The skin becomes white, soggy, and structurally weak. This is the absolute perfect breeding ground for aggressive bacteria and fungal colonies. You want the bricks of your heels to be hydrated, but you need the canyons between your toes to remain dry and ventilated. If you want to truly end the drought, you need a specific tool rather than just a fancy scent. This is where we implement the Urea protocol. When you are at the pharmacy, look for a cream that contains 10% to 20% urea. Urea is what we call a keratolytic. Most lotions just sit on top of the dead skin like a layer of wax. Urea is different. It actually works to chemically dismantle the dead, brick-like skin cells that are blocking moisture. It breaks down the tough exterior so that the hydration can actually penetrate into the deeper, living layers of the dermis. Here is your new rule of thumb for your nightly routine. Apply your urea cream heavily to the heels and the tops of the feet where the skin is thickest. But, and this is the golden rule, keep the spaces between your toes bone dry. If you have trouble reaching them, or they stay damp after a shower, use a hairdryer on a cool setting to ensure those gaps are ventilated. You are hydrating the structure while keeping the alleys clear of mold. Now we have audited the wires, the pipes, and even the paint. But we've finally reached the point where the damage moves past the surface and into the structural steel itself. What happens when the very beams of the skyscraper start to warp and give way? Before we move into the final phase of our audit, consider this. The next signs aren't just about discomfort. They are about the permanent reshaping of your life. We are entering the most visually shocking part of the audit, the architectural melt. The final phase of our audit focuses on the foundation. Your foot is a mechanical masterpiece consisting of 26 individual bones, 33 joints, and a complex web of over 100 muscles, tendons, and ligaments. In a healthy body, this foundation is both rigid enough to support your weight and flexible enough to absorb the shock of every step. However, when the grid is down and the logistics are failing, the structural integrity of these bones begins to erode. When blood flow is poor, your bones aren't getting the constant remodeling they need to stay strong. They begin to lose density. But here is the terrifying part. Because your sensory nerves are dead, You can't feel the warning signs of this weakening. You continue to put the full weight of your body, hundreds of pounds of pressure with every step, on a skeletal structure that is becoming as fragile as glass. This leads us to a condition known as Charcot foot, which I call the architectural melt. To visualize this, imagine a massive suspension bridge where someone has gone through and systematically loosened every single bolt. On a calm day, the bridge looks perfectly normal, but as soon as heavy traffic begins to roll across it, the beams start to shift and slide out of place. Because you have lost your protective sensation, you might develop a tiny microfracture in one of the small bones of your midfoot. A healthy person would feel a sharp pain, start to limp, and go to a doctor. But in the silent zone, you don't feel a thing. You keep walking, running, and climbing stairs. That tiny crack turns into a total structural collapse. The ligaments can no longer hold the bones in place, and the arch of your foot literally caves in toward the floor. I have seen patients walk into my clinic with a foot that has been completely reshaped. We call this a rocker bottom deformity because the foot becomes convex, resembling the rounded bottom of a rocking chair or the hull of a boat. These patients aren't usually in agony. In fact, they often come in simply because their sneakers have started feeling tight or weird. They don't realize that their foundation has disintegrated. Their bones have shifted so significantly that they are now walking directly on the delicate joints of the midfoot instead of the sturdy heel and the ball of the foot. This isn't just a change in shape. It is a permanent loss of the foot's mechanical ability to function, and it is one of the leading precursors to major surgical intervention. A critical point that most people miss is how to distinguish this collapse from a standard injury. Many people see a red, hot, and swollen foot and think, I must have twisted my ankle while I was out. They treat it with ice and elevation and wait for it to get better. But here is the nuance. If your foot is red, hot to the touch, and significantly swollen, but it doesn't really hurt, that is not a simple sprain. That is a massive red flag for an active architectural melt. When the bones are fracturing and the joints are collapsing, the body produces a massive inflammatory response, which creates the heat and swelling. If you are experiencing painless inflammation, you are in a high-stakes emergency. While the internal foundation is melting, a hostile takeover is usually occurring on the exterior. We have to talk about fungus. Fungus is a scavenger organism. It doesn't create its own energy. It finds a host and feeds. And what is the absolute favorite, high-octane fuel for fungus? Sugar. If your blood sugar is chronically elevated, your sweat and your skin cells become sweet. You are essentially providing an all-you-can-eat 24/7 buffet for fungal infections. This is why many people struggle for years with yellow, thick, and brittle toenails that refuse to respond to over-the-counter creams. Those yellow nails aren't just a hygiene issue or a sign of getting older. They are a sign that you are relentlessly fertilizing an invader from the inside out. To kill the weed on the surface, you have to stop feeding it from the bloodstream. We have now completed the full audit of your system. We've moved from the sparking wires of the grid to the clogged pipes of the logistics system, and finally to the crumbling beams of the foundation itself. It can feel heavy to realize how much is happening beneath the surface. But remember, this audit isn't designed to scare you. It's designed to give you the data you need to take back control of your skyscraper. Now, I want to give you the most important 30 seconds of your day, the daily routine that ensures your skyscraper stays standing for decades to come. We have officially reached the end of our systems audit, and if there is one thing I want you to take away from our time today, it is this. We are ending the era of "I feel fine." In the world of metabolic health, feeling fine is often a dangerous illusion. As we've discovered, by the time you actually feel something is wrong, the damage has usually been compounding for years. In a skyscraper, you don't wait for the windows to pop out of the penthouse to check the foundation. Let's bring this all together. We've audited the grid, looking for that phantom buzz and the sensory static that tells us the electrical insulation of your nerves is being scoured away. We've audited the logistics, monitoring for the Arctic extremity and the stalled healing that signals a supply chain gridlock in your arteries. And finally, we've looked at the foundation, watching for the architectural melt of collapsing bones and the biohazard buffet, where high sugar invites a fungal takeover. Your feet have been speaking a language of whispers. Now you finally have the dictionary to understand them. Now knowledge without action is just trivia. I'm giving you a mission. Tonight and every night before the lights go out, I want you to perform what I call the tactile shakeout. This isn't a complex medical exam. It is a 30-second daily systems check that ensures you stay ahead of the erosion. First is the sight test. Don't just glance. Really look. Use a handheld mirror if you need to see the soles. You are looking for the drought, those deep, jagged cracks in your heels, and the yellow flags of brittle, discolored nails. These are the surface-level indicators that the internal environment is changing. Second is the memory foam test. This is one of the most important diagnostic tools you have. Take your thumb and press it firmly into the fleshy area of your ankle for a slow count of 5. When you let go, observe the skin. Does it bounce back immediately, or does it leave a physical indentation, a pit, that lingers like memory foam? If that pit stays there, your logistics are overflowing. It is a sign that your heart and kidneys, your body's primary pumps and filters, are struggling to manage the toxic fluid load created by high sugar. Finally, perform the tactile sweep. This is the ultimate test for the silent zone. Before you put your shoes away or put your slippers on, run your hand deep inside them. Feel for pebbles, torn linings, or rough seams. If you find an object in your shoe that you've been walking on all day but never actually felt, you are officially in the silent zone. Your protective shield is down and your alarm system has been cut. If your audit tonight returns a yes on any of these points, if you feel the buzz, see the fissures, or find the pit, I have a very specific directive for you. Do not panic. Fear leads to paralysis, and we need movement. Instead of panicking, I want you to pivot. Pick up the phone tomorrow morning and schedule an appointment with your doctor. Stop listening to the excuses. Stop telling yourself it's just the dry winter air, or that your feet are cold because of the floor tiles, or that you're just getting old. Your feet have been trying to tell you the truth for years. It's time you finally listened. Your foundation is the only one you get. Audit it tonight and protect it tomorrow. I'm curious, what's the one thing you noticed during your audit tonight that actually surprised you? Maybe a pit you didn't expect, or a buzz you'd been ignoring. Let me know in the comments. Let's start a conversation and help each other get back to the penthouse. I'll see you in the next audit.